June 4, 1942. The sun has barely climbed over the horizon above the Pacific, turning the water into a sheet of molten gold. On the flight deck of the Japanese carrier Kaga, the air tastes of fuel, sea salt, and tension. Mechanics shout over the howl of engines as Zero fighters roar to life. Pilots sit in their cockpits, hands steady, eyes sharp, ready to launch the blow that will finally break American resistance in the Pacific. Everything about this morning feels disciplined, controlled, destined. But then, at 10:22 a.m., a lookout squints upward into the bright sky and freezes. Tiny specks appear where there should be nothing. A heartbeat later, the scream of diving aircraft tears the silence apart. And suddenly, the most powerful carrier task force in the world realizes it has been caught completely off guard. What happens next will shatter the myth of Japanese naval invincibility and change the entire war. To understand why the Battle of Midway unfolded the way it did, and why the outcome was so shocking, we have to roll back the clock just a few months. Because the spark that ignited Midway didn't begin near the Pacific at all. It began over Tokyo. On April 18, 1942, 16 American B-25 bombers thundered off the deck of the USS Hornet in the daring Doolittle raid. It was a mission that shouldn't have been possible. The B-25 was far too big for a carrier. The seas were rough. The range was barely enough to reach China. And the raid carried almost no real military value. But when the bombs fell on Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, and Kobe, they struck directly at Japan's pride. The physical damage was minimal, but the psychological impact was enormous. No enemy had ever struck the Japanese homeland. Civilians panicked, military leaders were furious, and the Imperial Navy's confidence, so high after 6 months of victories, was suddenly overshadowed by embarrassment and fear. Admiral Inosuke Yamamoto, mastermind of Pearl Harbor, felt personally responsible. He had promised the Emperor that Japan would eliminate American naval power quickly and absolutely. The Doolittle raid made one thing painfully clear. The Americans were still capable of surprising Japan. And so Yamamoto crafted an operation larger, riskier, and more complex than anything Japan had ever attempted. Its purpose was simple: lure out the remaining American carriers, destroy them, and force the United States into a negotiated peace. The key to this plan was a tiny atoll called Midway. Midway was small, just 2 islands, about 2 square kilometers each, but it sat in a position of extraordinary importance. From Midway, American aircraft could strike Japanese ships approaching Hawaii. It was the outer wall of the United States Pacific defense. Yamamoto believed that if Japan attacked Midway, the Americans would have no choice but to send their carriers into the open sea. And once they did, Japan's vastly experienced naval aviators would finish the job they started at Pearl Harbor. Japan's confidence rested on 2 assumptions: that their fleet was unstoppable and that the Americans knew nothing about their plans. Both were dangerously wrong. Inside a cramped basement room in Pearl Harbor, American codebreakers led by Commander Joseph Rochefort worked day and night breaking the Japanese Navy's encrypted communications. By late May, they knew that AF, Japan's coded target, was Midway. They knew the date of the attack. They knew the size of Japan's fleet. They even knew the direction it would approach from. The United States, for the first time in the war, would be fully prepared. It was Japan, not America, walking into a trap. By June 3rd, 3 American carriers, Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet, had taken up a secret position northeast of Midway. Their location was unknown to Japan. Their aircraft were armed and ready, and their pilots were young, aggressive, and determined. The next morning, June 4th, at exactly 4:30 a.m., Japan launched its opening blow: 108 aircraft from Agagi, Kaga, Tsuruyu, and Hiryu. Their target was Midway's airfields, fuel depots, and guns. As the Japanese planes streaked toward the island, U.S. radar detected them, and Midway launched every fighter, bomber, and attack aircraft it had. The defenders knew the odds. Many flew outdated planes, some had almost no combat experience, but they went anyway. As the battle began over Midway itself, Japanese pilots demonstrated why they were considered the best in the world. Their Zero fighters tore through Midway's defenders with brutal efficiency. The island was battered, but not destroyed. The airfield still functioned. Japanese commander sent a message back to Admiral Nagumo. Another strike will be needed to finish the job. This was the moment that changed everything. Nagumo had kept a reserve force of aircraft ready on his carriers. Half were armed with torpedoes for attacking ships, half with bombs for striking land targets. When he heard that Midway wasn't neutralized, he made the critical decision: rearmed the reserve aircraft again, but this time for anti-ship attacks. The flight crew scrambled. They lifted bombs off planes, dragged torpedoes into place, fueled aircraft, and worked at maximum speed in a dangerous, chaotic rush. Below deck, Japanese carriers were ticking bomb timers. And that's when the first Americans arrived. Torpedo squadrons from the American carriers flew low, slow, and without fighter escort. They were slaughtered. Zero fighters chewed them apart like wolves tearing into wounded prey. Torpedo Squadron 8 from USS Hornet lost every one of its 15 aircraft. Not a single torpedo hit. But their sacrifice forced the Japanese combat air patrol low and out of position. Up above, the sky was suddenly quiet. Then came the shadows. American dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown broke through cloud cover at the perfect moment. They rolled upside down, dove steeply, and let gravity pull them toward the Japanese fleet. At 10:22 a.m., Kaga was hit. 3 bombs tore through her deck, igniting fuel lines and aircraft. Seconds later, Tsuruyu erupted in flames. Then Agagi. In less than 5 minutes, 5 astonishing minutes, the core of Japan's carrier force was mortally wounded. The shock among Japanese commanders was immediate and overwhelming. Officers stared in disbelief as their carriers burned. Admiral Irasuku Yamamoto, far from the action aboard his flagship Yamato, received fragmented reports of disaster. 1 carrier lost, then another, then all 3. His silence was so profound that officers later described the atmosphere as spiritual collapse. Only Hiryu remained, and she fought back with remarkable courage. Her aircraft struck Yorktown twice, nearly sinking it. But American pilots found Hiryu later that afternoon and hit it with 4 devastating bomb strikes. By nightfall, Japan's entire carrier strike force, the same force that attacked Pearl Harbor, was gone. The Japanese high command was left stunned. Midway wasn't just a defeat, it was an unthinkable reversal. 4 fleet carriers sunk, around 3,000 sailors and aviators lost, hundreds of elite pilots dead, pilots Japan could not replace. The Imperial Navy had spent decades building this force. It lost it in a single day. And the Doolittle raid had played a key role. Without that raid, Japan might never have attempted such an ambitious, risky operation. The need to restore honor pushed Japan to overextend, to strike too boldly, and to underestimate the Americans' ability to respond. The long-term consequences were enormous. Japan lost the strategic initiative it had enjoyed for 6 months. It went from attacker to defender. The United States, with its massive industrial power, could replace every ship it lost. Japan could not. Within 2 years, the U.S. Navy would have more than a dozen modern carriers. Japan would never again have more than 4 at once. In the fading light of June 4th, as Agagi burned fiercely and her crew abandoned ship, one officer looked back at the glowing inferno and whispered a final, bitter truth. We were defeated before the first bomb fell because we believed we could not lose. The Battle of Midway wasn't just a clash of ships and aircraft. It was a clash of intelligence, courage, innovation, and strategy. It was a battle where luck and skill intertwined, where sacrifice shaped destiny, where a daring raid over Tokyo set off a chain reaction that would decide the future of the Pacific. And it remains to this day one of the most extraordinary turning points in military history. If you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to subscribe for more deep dive history stories. And drop a comment below telling us what topic you want to see next. Your ideas help shape future episodes.